The town in From does not simply kill children. It needs them. And if Season 4 is telling us the truth, then the dead children we have been seeing were never just victims of the town's history. They may be the reason the entire nightmare exists in the first place. Think about what the show has repeatedly done with children. Ethan arrives, and almost immediately the story starts changing around him. Victor survives decades, but his memories are locked inside childhood. The boy in white appears as a child. Tabitha keeps encountering the ghostly children. The Anghkooey children are connected to the oldest mystery in the town. And now, after everything revealed across Season 4, the question is no longer simply who sacrificed those children. The real question is much more disturbing. What did the town get from them? Because here's what changes everything. The children may not be the fuel that powers the town. They may be the prisoners holding the town together. And if that is true, then every person who enters Fromville may be part of the same machine, just at a different stage. Season 4 pushes the mythology much closer to the original sacrifice, the dead children, the strange cycles, and the forces manipulating the residents. The season even takes Boyd, Jade, Tabitha, Victor, and Ethan deeper into the relationship between the town's history and the supernatural system surrounding it. But the most important clue isn't a monster. It isn't the bottle tree. It isn't even the man in yellow. It's the children. And once you look at the story through that lens, several seemingly unrelated mysteries start pointing toward the same terrifying idea. The town doesn't need children because children are easy victims. It needs them because children are the only ones capable of keeping the cycle alive. And this is where it gets darker. Look at Victor. Victor arrived in the town as a child. He witnessed the massacre. He survived when almost everyone else disappeared. And for decades, he became the living memory of what happened. At first, that seems like simple trauma. But what if it isn't? What if Victor's survival was not an accident? What if the town deliberately allowed one child to remain? Because Victor isn't just a survivor. He is a memory container. He carries fragments of previous cycles that adults repeatedly fail to understand. He remembers the trees. He remembers the tunnels. He remembers the massacre. He remembers people that everyone else has forgotten. And most importantly, his memories keep becoming relevant exactly when the newer generation begins asking the same questions. That's not normal storytelling coincidence. That's a pattern. The town destroys adults, but it preserves certain children. And maybe that's because the children serve a different purpose. They remember, they believe, and they can interact with things that adults cannot. That brings us to Ethan. Ethan's importance has always been strange. He isn't simply another child trapped in the town. From the beginning, Ethan interprets Fromville through stories. He talks about quests. He talks about monsters. He talks about heroes. And normally, you could dismiss that as a frightened child trying to understand a nightmare. But what if Ethan's stories are actually describing the rules of the place? What if the town is not simply responding to physical actions? What if it responds to belief? This is the detail everyone missed. Adults enter Fromville carrying established ideas about reality. They want explanations. They want science. They want maps. They want rules. Children don't work that way. Children accept impossible things much faster. A tree can move. A monster can pretend to be human. A ghost can appear. A story can become real. And in a place where reality itself appears unstable, that difference could be incredibly important. Because if belief influences the system, then a child isn't merely easier to manipulate. A child may be more powerful inside it. And that would explain why the town repeatedly surrounds its deepest mysteries with children. The Anghkooey children aren't random ghosts. They are tied directly to the ancient sacrifice at the center of the town's mythology. The boy in white isn't random either. He appears at critical moments. He guides people. He sometimes saves them. And yet, despite everything we have learned, we still don't fully know what he actually is. A protector? A prisoner? A manifestation? Or something created by the same event that created the town? That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is why the supernatural system keeps producing child figures. Because if the children were simply casualties, their story should have ended with their deaths. Instead, they remain. They appear across different periods. They influence living characters. They communicate through visions. And they seem connected to the people trying to understand the town. That suggests something horrifying. The children may have never truly left. They may have become part of the structure itself. And if the original sacrifice created the supernatural prison, then perhaps the children's deaths didn't merely begin the curse. Their unresolved existence may be what continues to maintain it. Think about the imagery. The children are associated with darkness, stone, tunnels, visions, and the strange places beneath the town. They are repeatedly positioned between life and death. They are dead, but they are still communicating. They are powerless, but they influence events. They are victims, yet somehow they remain central to the mechanism. That contradiction may be the entire point, because perhaps the town is built on a paradox. The children were sacrificed to create immortality, but their suffering created a prison instead. The adults who made the bargain believed they were escaping death. Instead, they became trapped inside something that cannot properly die. And the creatures we now call monsters may be the final result of that bargain. Season 4 makes the connection between the original villagers, the sacrifice, and the monsters increasingly difficult to ignore. The season's mythology also continues, linking the dead children to the larger supernatural structure surrounding the town. So, suddenly, the monsters look different. They aren't just predators. They may be the adults who benefited from the sacrifice. And the children? They may be the price that was never paid in full. That would explain why the town keeps recreating the same emotional pattern. Parents, children, loss, hope, sacrifice. And then another cycle begins. But here's where the theory becomes much more dangerous. If the town needs children to maintain itself, then Ethan may not simply be the next victim. He may be the next key. And Victor may not simply be the survivor who knows too much. He may be proof that the system has been doing this for generations. The town doesn't need every child. It needs the right child. A child capable of seeing the rules. A child capable of believing the impossible. A child capable of becoming part of the story. And that may be why Ethan has been treated differently from everyone else. The monsters have had countless opportunities. Yet Ethan remains. Why? Why does the town repeatedly allow certain children to survive? Why does the boy in white guide some people toward answers instead of simply letting them die? Why do the dead children continue appearing instead of disappearing? And why does Fromville keep turning its deepest mysteries into something that looks almost like a children's story? Maybe because it is one. Not a children's story in the innocent sense. A story about children trapped inside a world created by adults. A story where the adults thought they controlled the sacrifice. But the sacrifice created something they could no longer control. And that gives us the most terrifying possibility yet. Maybe the town doesn't feed on fear. Maybe it feeds on cycles. And children are necessary because every cycle needs someone innocent enough to enter the story, believe the rules, and eventually become part of them. If that's true, then Fromville isn't simply trying to kill everyone. It's trying to continue the story. And that means escaping the town may not be enough. Someone has to end the story itself. Because as long as the children remain trapped inside it, the town may never truly die. But if the children are the key to the town, then one question becomes impossible to ignore. Why would the people who created this nightmare need children at all? That is where the original sacrifice becomes more important than anything happening in the present. Because the monsters may not be the beginning of the story. They may be the result of it. And this changes how we should interpret every creature in Fromville. For most of the series, the monsters appear almost completely self-contained. They come out at night. They hunt. They torture people. They imitate familiar faces. And when morning comes, they disappear back into the darkness. But look at what they don't do. They don't simply kill everyone as quickly as possible. They play with people. They talk. They manipulate. They create emotional pressure. Sometimes they specifically target relationships. They know names. They know fears. They know how to make someone open a door. That behavior is strange if their only purpose is feeding. But it makes much more sense if their real purpose is maintaining the cycle. Because killing is not enough. The system needs people to suffer, reproduce the same choices, discover the same mysteries, and eventually reach the same impossible decision. And this is where the children become essential. The original people who created the supernatural bargain were trying to escape death. But the story suggests that something went terribly wrong. Instead of achieving freedom, they created an existence where death itself became corrupted. The monsters look human. They remember human behavior. They wear human clothes. They smile. They talk. But they're no longer human. That could be the punishment. They got what they wanted. They survived. But they survived wrong. And if the children were sacrificed to create that immortality, then every monster may be carrying the consequence of that original decision. Suddenly, the smiling faces of the creatures become more disturbing. Because underneath the monster is a person who chose survival. And underneath the survival is the death of children. That could explain why the monsters behave less like wild animals and more like actors following a script. They aren't hunting randomly. They are participating in something that happened long before Boyd arrived. And this is where the story connects back to the boy in white. For years, the boy in white has looked like the obvious opposite of the monsters. The monsters are dark. He is dressed in white. The monsters attack. He sometimes helps. The monsters manipulate. He appears to guide. But what if that interpretation is too simple? What if the boy in white isn't the enemy of the system? What if he is another product of it? That possibility becomes much more interesting when you consider his connection to Victor. Victor sees him as a familiar presence, a figure from his childhood, someone who existed when the town was already broken. That means the boy in white is not simply a modern manifestation. He appears to exist outside ordinary time. And if the children are trapped inside the town's supernatural mechanism, then perhaps the boy in white represents something the monsters cannot become. Innocence, not goodness. Innocence. There is a difference. The monsters represent adults who chose survival at any cost. The dead children represent innocence destroyed by that choice. And the boy in white could exist somewhere between those two states. He knows the town. But he doesn't appear to belong to it completely. He can guide people. But he cannot simply destroy the system. He can reveal paths. But he cannot walk them for everyone.
Why?
Because perhaps he is trapped too. And this is where it gets darker. If the boy in white is a prisoner rather than a protector, then some of his actions suddenly become terrifying. Every time he leads someone toward a dangerous place, maybe he isn't simply helping them. Maybe he is trying to find someone capable of doing what he cannot. Someone capable of breaking the original bargain. Someone capable of reaching the children. Someone capable of ending the cycle. And that could explain why the story repeatedly brings certain characters toward the same ancient mystery. Tabitha.
Jade.
Victor. Ethan.
Different people.
Different generations. Different personalities. But the same destination. The children. The sacrifice, the story, the cycle, that cannot be ignored. Because Fromville doesn't behave like a normal physical location. People don't simply become lost. They become connected. Dreams connect them. Memories connect them. Objects connect them. Symbols connect them. And now, the children appear to connect the past and present. This is the detail everyone missed. The town may not be moving people through space. It may be moving them through roles. One person becomes the mother searching for the children. Another becomes the storyteller. Another becomes the protector. Another becomes the sacrifice. Another becomes the witness. And another becomes the person who finally understands the pattern. That's why the repeated imagery matters. The story keeps giving us different versions of the same emotional situation. A parent trying to save a child trying to understand a monster. A survivor trying to remember what happened. A community trying to protect itself. And every time someone gets close to the truth, the town creates another crisis.
Why?
Because understanding the system is dangerous to the system. The town doesn't merely want people dead. It wants them confused. And confusion is especially important when the truth involves children. Because if everyone believes the children are simply ghosts, then nobody asks the more important question. Why are they still here? That question changes everything. If their consciousness remains trapped inside the supernatural structure, then perhaps freeing them is the real objective. Not killing the monsters. Not escaping through a magical doorway. Not simply finding a road home. Freeing the children. And if that is the real objective, then the entire mythology becomes a rescue story disguised as a survival horror story. That's a massive difference. Because a survival story asks, how do we get out? But From may actually be asking, how do we undo what was done? And that makes Tabitha's journey much more significant. Her connection to the children has never felt accidental. She isn't simply another resident who happened to see them. She is repeatedly pulled toward the places where the town's history becomes visible. And her role as a mother matters. Because the original crime wasn't simply murder. It was the destruction of children for the benefit of adults. So the story may require a mother to confront that original sin. Someone who refuses to accept the sacrifice. Someone who chooses the child over survival. That would create a perfect reversal. The original people chose themselves over the children. The final heroes may have to choose the children over themselves. And that may be the actual test. Because maybe the town can survive people fighting monsters. It can survive people trying to escape. It can survive people killing creatures. But it cannot survive someone refusing to participate in the original bargain. Someone saying, no more sacrifices. And that brings us to Ethan. Because Ethan represents exactly that kind of character. He keeps approaching the mystery through stories. He believes impossible things. He sees patterns. And most importantly, he is still a child. If the supernatural system requires children because children can interact with a story differently, then Ethan may be uniquely dangerous to the town. Not because he is physically powerful, but because he can understand the rules without accepting the assumptions adults bring with them. And perhaps that's why the town keeps testing him. It wants to know whether he will become another victim or another storyteller. But there is an even bigger possibility. What if Ethan isn't supposed to die? What if he is supposed to replace someone? Think about the repeated role of the child in the mythology. A child appears. A sacrifice occurs. The cycle continues. Another generation arrives. Another child becomes connected to the supernatural story. That suggests the town may not need one specific child forever. It may need a successor. A new child to carry the story when the old one disappears. And if Victor was once that child, and Ethan is now occupying a similar position, then Victor's entire life takes on a horrifying new meaning. Maybe Victor wasn't simply the boy who survived. Maybe he was the first person the town tried to turn into its next keeper. But something went wrong. He remembered too much. He forgot too much. He survived too long. And now Ethan is entering the same position. Which means the question isn't whether Ethan will survive. The question is, what does the town want Ethan to become? Because if the town needs children to keep its story alive, then Ethan's greatest danger may not be the monsters outside his house. It may be the possibility that the town is slowly teaching him how to become part of it. And once you realize that Victor's childhood, the boy in white, the Anghkooey children, the original sacrifice, and Ethan's strange importance stop looking like separate mysteries. They begin to look like different pieces of the same machine. A machine built around one terrible rule. The story cannot continue without a child. And if that is true, then the final battle may not be between humans and monsters at all. It may be between the people who want to preserve the cycle and the children who were trapped inside it. But there is still one piece missing. Because if children are the foundation of the town's supernatural system, then why are the monsters so desperate to control the living? And why does the town keep creating new generations instead of simply repeating the original sacrifice? The answer may be hidden in the one thing Fromville has been protecting more carefully than anything else: the cycle itself. And once that cycle is finally understood, we may discover that the monsters aren't the ones controlling it. Someone else is. And this is where the entire theory reaches its darkest conclusion. If the town needs children to keep the cycle alive, then the monsters are not the true center of the story. They are only the enforcers. The real system is much older. And much more intelligent. Because look at what Fromville has always done. Whenever someone gets close to understanding the truth, something changes. A new threat appears. A person disappears. A memory returns. A symbol becomes important. A tree moves. A vision begins. The town doesn't simply attack. It redirects attention. That is the behavior of a system protecting itself. And if the children are trapped inside that system, then every new generation becomes another opportunity to keep the mechanism running. This explains something that has always felt strange about Fromville. Why does the town allow hope? Why allow people to build houses? Why allow them to create relationships? Why allow children to grow up? Why allow anyone to believe they might escape? Because hope is necessary for the cycle. Without hope, there is no meaningful sacrifice. Without relationships, there is no emotional pressure. Without children, there is no continuation. The town doesn't need everyone to die immediately. It needs them to care about something enough to sacrifice themselves for it. And children are the strongest possible trigger for that instinct. A parent will risk everything for a child. A community will break its own rules for a child. A frightened person may become brave when someone innocent is threatened. That means the children aren't simply victims. They're also the emotional mechanism that makes the adults behave exactly the way the town needs. That's why the original sacrifice is so important. The people who created the bargain didn't simply sacrifice random lives. They sacrificed children because children represented something that could not be replaced. Innocence,
Family.
future, and perhaps the supernatural force behind the bargain knew exactly what it was taking. Not just lives. The future itself. That's the part that changes the meaning of immortality. The people who wanted eternal life may have received it, but they destroyed the future in exchange. So now they exist forever inside a place where nothing truly progresses. The same streets, the same night, the same monsters, the same fears, the same cycle. Even the town feels frozen. It changes, but never truly moves forward. And that may be the punishment. The people who wanted to escape death became trapped in a world where time itself became a prison. This is why the children are so important. Children represent time moving forward. They grow. They change. They become adults. They create new generations. But in Fromville, the supernatural system appears determined to prevent that natural progression. The children remain symbols, memories,
Ghosts.
visions, stories. They cannot properly move forward. They are permanently trapped at the moment everything went wrong. And that gives the word Anghkooey a much darker emotional meaning. Whatever its exact translation or supernatural function ultimately proves to be, the repeated communication from the children clearly suggests that they are trying to convey something to the living. They are not behaving like ordinary monsters. They are trying to be understood. And that may be the single most important distinction in the entire mystery. The monsters want people afraid. The children want people to remember. That is why memory becomes so important. Victor forgets. Tabitha remembers. Jade sees. Ethan interprets. Different characters are carrying different fragments of the same truth. And maybe the town survives by keeping those fragments separated. One person knows the symbol. Another knows the children. Another knows the tunnels. Another remembers the massacre. Another understands the trees. But nobody sees the entire picture. Because the moment someone combines those pieces, the system becomes vulnerable. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is who benefits from keeping the pieces separated, and that brings us back to the man in yellow. If the town has a controlling intelligence, he may represent its most direct physical manifestation. But even then, he may not be the ultimate creator. He could simply be the latest face of the same force. The same force that made the original bargain. The same force that turned humans into monsters. The same force that keeps the children trapped. And if he represents the continuation of that bargain, then his purpose becomes much clearer. He doesn't necessarily need to kill everyone. He needs to prevent the truth from being completed. Because a completed story is a dangerous thing. Once the residents understand why the children were sacrificed, the original bargain can potentially be challenged. And if the bargain can be challenged, the entire supernatural structure could collapse. That would explain why the town repeatedly attacks people at moments of discovery. The closer they get, the more violently the system reacts. So, what happens if someone finally reaches the children? What happens if someone learns exactly what happened on that night? What happens if someone refuses to repeat the original choice? That may be the endgame. Not escaping Fromville, breaking the agreement that created it. And that gives every major character a different role. Victor is the witness. He survived the original catastrophe and carries memories that the town desperately wants buried. Tabitha is the searcher. She keeps moving toward the hidden truth beneath the surface. Jade is the decoder. He sees symbols and connections that other people overlook. Boyd is the protector. His instinct is always to save people, even when the system makes that impossible. Ethan is the storyteller. And that role may be more important than anyone realizes. Because stories are how the town communicates. Stories are how memories survive. Stories are how one generation can understand what happened to another. And perhaps that is why Ethan's presence matters so much. He is young enough to believe the impossible, but he is also old enough to begin understanding the rules. That makes him dangerous. Because the town's greatest weapon is confusion. And Ethan's greatest strength may be his ability to turn confusion into a story. Once something becomes a story, it can be remembered. Once it is remembered, it can be repeated. And once it is repeated, the hidden pattern becomes visible. That could be the reason the town constantly creates contradictions. It wants everyone to question what they saw. It wants people to doubt their memories. It wants the residents arguing over whether something was real. Because uncertainty keeps the prison intact. But the children are the opposite. They are fixed memories. They cannot forget what happened. They cannot move on. And perhaps they have been waiting for someone alive to finally understand them. Which brings us to the most horrifying possibility. Maybe the children don't need to be rescued from the town. Maybe the town exists because the children are still trapped. The supernatural structure could be the physical manifestation of their unresolved suffering. The roads, the monsters, the tunnels, the visions, the impossible geography, the repeating cycles. All of it could be the shape that their unfinished story has taken. If so, then destroying the monsters would never be enough. You could kill every creature in the forest, and the town could simply create more. Because the monsters are symptoms. The children are the wound. And the original sacrifice is the infection. That is why the title suddenly makes sense. Why does the town need children? Because without them, there is no emotional center to the curse. No innocence to corrupt. No future to steal. No sacrifice to repeat. No story to continue. And if the town's entire existence depends on repeating that original act in different forms, then the only way to defeat it is to do the one thing the original people refused to do. Choose the children. Not survival. Not immortality. Not power. The children. Imagine what that means for the final conflict. The monsters approach. The town begins collapsing. The survivors finally discover what happened. And then they are offered the same choice. Save themselves or save the children. That would be the perfect test. Because the supernatural force behind Fromville would finally be asking the descendants of the original decision to make the same decision again. And the heroes would have to refuse. That's how the cycle ends. Not with a bigger weapon. Not with a stronger monster. Not with another escape route. With a moral choice. A choice that reverses the original sacrifice. And if that happens, the children may finally disappear. Not because they were defeated. Because they were released. And that would completely reframe the tragedy of From. The children were never there simply to scare us. They were there to remind us what the town was built on. Every monster, every death, every cycle, every mysterious symbol, every impossible vision. Everything leads back to the same crime. Children were sacrificed so others could live forever. And now the town forces generation after generation to repeat the consequences. But there is one final question. If the children are the foundation of the prison, and Ethan is becoming the next person capable of understanding their story, then what happens when the town realizes he knows the truth? Because maybe the monsters have never been trying to kill Ethan. Maybe they have been waiting for him to become old enough to remember. And if Ethan finally remembers what the children are trying to say, the entire town may have to choose between repeating the original sacrifice or finally letting the dead children go. So the real ending of From may not be about finding the road home. It may be about ending the story that created the road in the first place. And when the final child finally stops screaming, the question won't be whether the monsters can survive. It will be whether Fromville can exist without them.